fact, let's just leave all of the mics open because this call is very controversial, and I will say without question it's going to require and have a lot of input. But I want to start off with a bulletin from Ford Motor Company just on today, October 22nd, 11:39 this morning, talking about automatic transmission Mercon LV fluid color. And I'm going to read it as just a short paragraph here. Some 2008 to 2013 vehicles equipped with automatic transmission, factory filled with Mercon LV fluid, may exhibit dark-colored transmission fluid that may look burnt in appearance. This is a normal characteristic of this fluid and will not affect transmission function or durability. The Mercon LV fluid is a deep red color compared to conventional Mercon V bright red fluid, and the color naturally darkens at relatively low mileage. In some cases, the fluid may appear to have a green tint due to dye used to check for leaks at the assembly plant. Transmission fluid color should not be used as sole indicator for transmission repairs. Refer to correct vehicle and model year workshop manual and or maintenance guide for diagnostic repairs and or scheduled maintenance. And one of the things that I find is a common path, I would say the last several years, is for the manufacturers to really provide reason and, for lack of a better word, threats that standardized vehicle maintenance is just not going to be accepted. Recently, I read one from a manufacturer that basically said their warranty is void if there's a fluid flush on the transmission. And you think about that and what preventive maintenance is, and the manufacturers now wait till the light comes on viewpoint is really a concern. If you look at a lot of the engine damage that's starting to show itself with these 7,500 and 10,000 mile oil changes, the fact is dirt is a friction material. Even if the fluid or the oil does not have a mileage recommendation below 150,000 miles, but chemically it may be fine. But my goodness, that fluid's going to get dirty. And that dirt is a friction material. My view is some logic has to be placed in here because if you let a mileage-driven interval come and go, is it providing that customer a choice for what I consider proper vehicle maintenance? A lot of people could debate, discuss in great detail what mileage services are recommended at different intervals. For example, a transmission flush. Some aggressive dealers might offer a transmission fluid flush in a 30,000 mile package, saying that that's standard maintenance and that's just what you do. And they might hit 4 or 5 fluid flushes at that mileage interval. And the fluid at that point in time generally is going to be in perfect condition. I will say, however, I saw a pickup truck I'm going to use as an example one time. I pulled the dipstick on that pickup truck, and the fluid was just black as coal at 18,000 miles. So when I researched this vehicle to see why in the world would that fluid be in this condition, this was the pickup truck that hauled around one of these vacuum motors to suck up the leaves in the community. So its only function was to suck up the leaves. Obviously, some of that debris was getting into that fluid. And I would venture to say the standard maintenance that should be done on that transmission would likely include a filter replacement because of all the debris in there. So that being an example, if that transmission was not serviced for ongoing mileage and a transmission had a failure at 30,000 miles due to this contaminant, and the factory was aware and looked at this, I am sure, without question, they would say, oh my goodness, well, we can't warranty this. This is a situation where the fluid was contaminated. It's not a warrantable item. So where's the balance in this? Where should you recommend a fluid flush? I know in the scope of maintenance manuals and in the owner's operational procedures, you might find it where it says the fluid is never to be flushed. There's not a maintenance. Can't even check the fluid level in a lot of transmissions today, which to me illustrates more of a need for a maintenance flush at a certain mileage interval. Because if you don't, we can't even tell the fluid level. I think a few key points here to keep in mind is that the dealership should have standards set in advance that certain mileage intervals our first suggested flush are. And I think those flushes need to be reasonable mileage because the vehicle fluid is better than it was 20 years ago. I can't dispute that, and a lot of them are synthetic. So with that being said and opening that as a preface, I'd like to open it up for some conversation and get some thoughts on this.
I'd like to throw in another example, if possible. Within the Toyota manufacturing process or manufacturing maintenance guidelines, if you look in a Toyota owner's manual, it will say that for instance, brake fluid is never recommended to be flushed. Same year, we switch over to Lexus, which is indeed a Toyota product, and they recommend that the brake fluid be flushed every 2 years or at the most every 30,000 miles. So in some instances, the manufacturers are sending mixed messages to the dealer bodies themselves. You can't tell, logic would dictate that a Toyota does not have inferior components or better components rather than the Lexus model. And it's the same brake fluid in both. So why on earth would the Highline model recommend having the brake fluid flushed and the standard line recommend that it never be flushed when many of the components are identical between the model lines?
Well, that is an excellent example, and also one because brake fluid absorbs moisture.
Yes, it's an anhydrous fluid.
And I think when brake fluid gets over 3% water, it should be flushed out of there.
Well, that's likely a marketing issue for cost of ownership regarding a Toyota, I would imagine.
I don't dispute that, but whether it's a marketing issue or a reality, that's what we as
how do we deal with it, right?
have to determine. Is it the right thing to do for the customer? Well, if it needs it, then it's the right thing to do. For instance, with brake fluid, you can use the litmus paper test to determine if there's an excessive amount of moisture in the fluid, which will cause contamination and cause all kinds of other issues, especially with the very sophisticated anti-lock brake systems. I'd hate to think that I was pushing water through one of those $2,500 units. that's going to eventually corrode because there's contaminated fluid being pushed through.
Well, actually, the test that you put most of the manufacturers put for the brake fluid, where you put the paper inside the brake fluid, doesn't measure water. It measures parts per million copper content, actually, which they tend to roll the same. But there is a tester that's available that does measure water, where you stick it inside. It's battery-operated probe, where you stick it inside the fluid and push a button, and it does measure water content. However, most of the strips are parts per million copper. I've not seen the strip that would measure the amount of water content, but they may be there. I just am not aware of them.
I think a lot of them for coolant and other fluids also measure acidic values and pH content in the fluids, which is an indication that there's contamination. But regardless of the method that we determine that it is in need, nonetheless there's a contradiction there between the manufacturer and I agree with the previous commenter that that's probably a marketing thing. But the reality is we still are there to serve the customer and serve their best interests.
So I guess it comes down to a proper walk-around.
That's always the case in point, regardless of what else we do.
Well, I think there's got to be a determination here, and I know a lot of times you might look at it in this area or that area, it's considered severe use, or if you tow a vehicle, common sense would say if you have a vehicle that does a lot of towing, that's going to require more differential services and more transmission transfer case type services than a vehicle that doesn't do any towing at all. But what do you consider reasonable mileage to start recommending flush services?
Well, I think that depends on the duty cycle of the vehicle, and I would say that the 30,000-mile transmission service is definitely a thing of the past. It would be really an unusual circumstance that I would, in good conscience, say yes, you have to do that at 30,000 miles, depending on manufacturer. There are still some manufacturers that advocate go ahead and at 30,000 it should be done, but the ones that are using the more sophisticated fluids. They're saying 150,000 miles. I'm a little skeptical that it's going to go 150,000 miles without any at all. But I think at probably 60,000 miles, it ought to be closely scrutinized and determine if it needs to be serviced at that point.
I love that mileage, 50 or 60,000 miles to recommend fluid flushes. I think I would consider that a reasonable preventive maintenance item. And now where you have some manufacturers saying, well, they have a 100,000-mile warranty, and if they see a transmission flush in maintenance history, they have the right to say that warranty is void. I often wonder, though, how would you police that? How would they actually do that? Would they say that, okay, we're going to check the dealership maintenance history on everything with the transmission repair, and if it's been serviced, refuse it? Well, I would doubt that, although if that would ever be a concern for a dealer, rather than not recommend maintenance items, I would prefer it be a part of a package which would not necessarily list transmission flush, but a 60,000-mile package that included flush maintenance items would be an easy one to, let's say, detour, or lack of better words, confuse the maintenance history a little bit on the manufacturer's warranty threat or What are some thoughts on that?
Is 150,000 miles the exception or the rule? What? I guess I haven't seen one that tall. 50, 60 seems reasonable, even with the 150,000 mile increment. I actually, in my experience with manufacturer, they haven't gone too deep in research, to find out what type of fluid was used or what procedures were taken during a fluid flush in terms of denying a warranty claim, because the transmission had been serviced before it was recommended. That's just my experience.
I think from the consumer standpoint, if warranty was denied because they took extra steps in taking good care of their vehicle, I'm not sure how that would stand up in the court of law. I would think that would be frowned upon pretty heavily if they're going to deny a warranty claim because, hey, I know it says it doesn't need it, but I felt more comfortable maintaining my car in a better fashion than the factory recommended, and now you're telling me because I did that I'm not going to get warranty. I don't think that's going to fly in court.
I don't think it would either, due to the fact that they have had prior examples where they said you have to use the factory for oil change or this particular filter that's branded, and that will not stand up as an item that in court of law you can't demand that a person use a certain oil filter brand or certain type of motor oil just that it meets their specifications.
Yeah, that is correct. Especially when the brands that most manufacturers put on are made by someone else and just rebranded with their logos on them.
And I think, too, it's worth discussion that most of the chemical companies, if the flushes are done in certain time frames, they have warranty on their product. So if the transmission would fail and you did a flush at a normal interval before 36,000 miles, generally the first $2,000 would be covered, even if it wasn't under a warranty of any kind, by the chemical supplier. So most of these flushes do carry some kind of warranty from the vendor, other than the manufacturer.
Yeah, in fact, that's a fair selling point for a lot of dealers. What about induction service? I'll tell you my personal experience with induction service, and I hadn't given it a whole lot of value or weight until the last few years, when the advent of direct injection has become much more prevalent. Now I personally have seen, if the injector is no longer spraying fuel on the valve, right on the intake valve, it doesn't have much means to clean itself. And personally experienced a few clients in the field that had some drivability concerns that they spent a lot of money on before it was discovered that there's heavy carbon buildup on top of the valves. It would have been simply, it would have never happened had there been induction service. It's 1530 or wherever, Not extremely high mileage cars either, mind you. 60, 70,000. And this particular one I'm talking about, Volkswagen. In fact, I used a before and after photo to present to clients supporting the service. Nobody knows what direct injection means, but it's up to us to educate people on those things and how those services can be used or useful.
No question about that. And then there's as many different gasolines. A lot of people still get the same gas at the same gas station, routinely. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting from the same refinery and the same supplier every single time they go there. And there can be contaminants or different additives that have adverse effects on each other's types of gasolines and additives that can cause more buildup and corrosion. So a fuel induction service is a critical step if you have drivability issues. Before you go much farther, I think that's one of the first steps that you would even recommend.
Well, I guess
to recap this, let me ask this one question. So we're pretty much understanding that even though some of the manufacturers may be suggesting flushes should not be done for fear of a warranty claim result, that the general thought is preventive maintenance still has its place. We shouldn't bow down to that fear, and the primary concern is, as always, remains proper customer care and how they can get the most life out of that vehicle to properly maintain it around 50 or 60,000 with flush intervals.
Agreed.
That's wonderful. I would say that now we can open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions or comments or a question about their operation, raise your hand by pressing number 1, and Mike will see that you've raised your hand and will bring your question up for the group. Okay, we've got no questions, so that will end today's call. Thanks for attending, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.